The sun, a crimson sphere, tumbled behind the jagged edges of the canyon, casting long shadows that elongated the already gaunt silhouette of the man standing at the precipice. The wind, fierce and stinging, whipped across his face, forcing him to squint and shield his eyes. This was a land where the sky seemed to touch the shoulders, and death was commonplace. The Wild West, as it unfolded before him, harsh and unforgiving, held both beauty and danger in equal measure. The Canyon of the Red Wind Ranch, a name he alone used, nestled in the heart of this wild terrain. A small house made of roughly hewn logs, just a few corrals for livestock, and a windmill creaking under the gusts of wind. These comprised all his holdings. His name was Ethan. His face was etched with wrinkles like a dried-up creek, and his eyes were deep wells, holding silent weariness and resilience. He wasn't a man of many words, preferring silence to the sound of the wind and the cries of predatory birds. Ethan descended into the ravine unhurriedly, his step firm, accustomed to the stony ground. He seemed to merge with the harsh land, bearing the marks of years lived and trials endured. He walked at a leisurely pace, scrutinizing the surrounding area. Deep in the gorge, where the cliffs cast a dense shadow, he spotted them. Several dozen stocky, powerful creatures with fur as rigid as hardened steel. They resembled a strange blend of horses and bulls, with massive hooves and sharp horns. Not horses, but not bulls either. Griffons, he called them. His guards, his hope, his curse. Ethan cared for them with the same diligence he applied to himself. They were wild, untamed beings, but he felt them, understood their habits. He was one of the few who could approach them unarmed and still remain alive. And of course, he alone knew their true nature. Not simply animals, but weapons, living and deadly, obedient to their master's hand. On that evening, when the sun, like a great blazing ball, finally dipped below the jagged horizon, shattering the peace of the ranch, the silence was broken by the thunder of hooves and the anxious neighing of horses. Several riders, their faces obscured by pulled-down hats and rough bandanas, silently approached Ethan's house. They were clad in coarse, sun-faded clothing, and their graceless movements betrayed them as men accustomed to hard labor and swift violence. These were bandits, wanderers, perpetual seekers of easy gains, for whom another's life was worth nothing. Leading this gang was a tall, sinewy man whose eyes seemed to be carved from ice. They called him Sheriff, and the name instilled fear even in the most hardened cutthroats. "Hey, old man, come out," Sheriff bellowed, his voice amplified by the night stillness, echoing through the gorge and chilling the blood. "We've come for your livestock." Ethan, seemingly carved from stone, emerged from his house. Neither fear nor even the slightest surprise showed on his face, lined with a network of wrinkles. Only a calm, almost detached expectation. He knew this moment would come, sooner or later. His gaze, like a sharp blade, scanned the faces of the bandits, assessing their number and, most importantly, their readiness for a fight. There were about 12 of them, all armed to the teeth. Ethan, clenching his teeth tightly, exhaled slowly, gathering his strength. "Get out," he said calmly, his voice quiet, but with a distinct edge of steel. "You have nothing to gain here." The sheriff, a burly man with harsh features, sneered, his face contorted in a vicious grin. His laughter, dry and unpleasant, echoed across the dusty street. "Nothing to catch? We can clearly see you've got a whole herd of prime horses, and we're taking them, old man, whether you like it or not." Ethan shook his head, his gaze a mixture of weariness and determination. "You have no idea what kind of evil you're dealing with, and you'd be better off never finding out the hard way. We don't care about your warnings. We'll take whatever we want, and that's final," roared one of the bandits, his face contorted with rage. The sheriff nodded to his men, and they, bristling with weapons, began to advance slowly but surely. Ethan retreated, his steps measured, but despair filled his eyes. He moved toward the enclosure where those creatures known as Griffons were kept. He knew a confrontation was inevitable. He had to protect them. He had to protect himself. When the bandits were close, only a few paces from the enclosure, Ethan took a deep breath and swung open the creaking gate. Wild creatures burst forth, their deafening roar echoing through the valley, carrying far and wide. Enraged and thirsting for blood, they were the embodiment of primordial fury. The bandits, who a second before had been full of contempt and confidence, froze like statues upon seeing these monsters. Terror contorted their coarse faces, transforming them into masks of fear. "What devilish thing is this?" one of the bandits yelled, his voice trembling with animalistic dread, betraying his true nature. "Your deaths," Ethan replied calmly, his gaze unwavering. And at that very moment, Griffons, as if unleashed from hell, launched their attack. They were swift as lightning, strong as 10 bears, and lethal as death itself. Their sharp hooves crushed bones like splinters, horns pierced flesh like paper, and teeth tore through bodies, turning them into a bloody mess. The bandits, utterly unprepared for such a brutal encounter, were torn apart in a matter of minutes, their screams of horror drowned out by the predator's roars and death rattles. The sheriff tried to escape, but the Griffons overtook him, turning him into a bloody pulp. Ethan, carved from stone, stood aside, observing the slaughter. His face was impassive, but a hidden weariness was etched into the depths of his eyes, in every scar. He felt no joy from the victory, only crushing regret and all-consuming emptiness. He understood clearly that he would pay a terrible price for this recklessness. When it was all over, Ethan slowly walked across the battlefield, gazing at the lifeless bodies that covered the ground. Death hung in the air, mingled with the smell of iron and decay. He knew that very soon others would arrive, greedy vultures, craving revenge or profit. He had to be ready for their arrival. He had to protect his Griffons, his life, which now belonged entirely to them. Only after several days did she appear in his seemingly forever desolate life. A woman. Her name was Sarah. She was young and beautiful, but a deep, persistent sorrow lingered in her eyes. She came to Ethan's ranch, hoping to find solace. Her husband had fallen by the hands of bandits, and she was left entirely alone, without a penny to her name. Ethan, who had always kept to himself, greeted her cautiously. He didn't want anyone in his life, but he couldn't abandon a woman in need either. He offered Sarah work on the ranch, hoping she'd leave soon, but who could say for sure? Sarah agreed without hesitation. She was a strong woman, hardened by the trials of difficult labor. She cared for the animals, bustled about the house, and gradually, day by day, began to settle into Ethan's home. Her presence, like a gentle breeze, seeped into his lonely heart. She always respected his silence, seeing strength and courage within him. Over time, their relationship evolved into something more than just work. A deep bond, forged in trust, began to grow. They started to open up, sharing their most intimate thoughts and feelings. Ethan, baring his soul, recounted his past, how he'd found the Griffons, and how they'd become his family. Sarah, in turn, shared memories of her husband, of her boundless lost love, and of the flickering hope she held for the future. These meetings with Sarah gradually changed Ethan. Her presence, a balm to his wounded heart, softened him, restoring his hope. He began to forget the past, his guilt, his sense of doom. And then he realized he wanted to live. He wanted to love. But this fragile peace, alas, proved fleeting. One day, as the sun was already setting, painting the wheat fields gold, riders appeared in the distance. Their silhouettes, ominous portents against the crimson sunset, were unmistakable. These were the men hired by the new sheriff, a man bent on avenging the previous lawmen whose authority had been challenged. They moved with the assurance of a predator pack ready to strike. Each man was heavily armed, and an unwavering resolve to destroy Ethan and his Griffons blazed in their eyes. Ethan knew instantly that a battle was inevitable. Fury, mingled with a desperate anxiety, boiled in his heart. He couldn't let them kill Sarah, raze his home, his hope. He had to defend everything he held dear to protect his land. "Sarah, run!" Ethan shouted as the riders closed in on the ranch, the distance shrinking with every passing second. "Run and eat!" "I won't go anywhere," Sarah retorted, her eyes blazing with determination, reflecting the sunset's glow and the fire of anger that had ignited within her. "I'll stay with you," Ethan declared, a tenderness welling in his eyes, mirrored in the fading light of day. He realized he loved her, with every fiber of his being, and was ready to face death for her, to accept it as inevitable. His heart thudded loudly in his chest, sensing the impending battle. Without hesitation, he ordered his warriors, the fierce Griffons, to prepare for combat. Ethan knew this fight would be their last. A battle cry echoed, and the earth trembled. Griffons, with their wings raised, plunged into an attack against their foes. Their thunderous roar echoed across the battlefield, striking terror into the hearts of their adversaries. The riders, brave but, alas, powerless, fired from their weapons, yet their shots were almost useless against these wild, ferocious creatures. The battle raged, transforming into a brutal and bloody slaughter. Ethan fought like a man possessed, like the embodiment of a demon himself. His movements were swift, precise, honed to perfection. He fired from 2 revolvers, giving his enemies not a single chance of survival. His hands, like 2 snakes, snatched and reloaded the weapons, sowing death and chaos in the enemy ranks. Sarah selflessly aided Ethan, skillfully reloading weapons, handing him ammunition. There was no fear in her eyes, only unwavering faith in him, in their shared cause. In the thick of the fight, Ethan was wounded. A bullet struck him in the shoulder, and he staggered, collapsing onto the ground and staining the earth with blood. The riders, seeing this, charged toward him like wild beasts. Sarah, without hesitation, rushed to Ethan's defense, but the odds were clearly against her. They seized her, roughly spun her around, and pressed a cold blade against her throat. "Surrender, old man," shouted the new insolent sheriff, "or your girl will pay for you." Ethan, battling through the pain, glanced at Sarah. A chilling terror was frozen in her eyes. He couldn't let her get hurt. It was beyond his capacity. "I surrender," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking into a barely audible rasp. "Just let her go." "Too late, old man," Sheriff replied, his eyes seeming to gleam with sinister malice. "You'll pay for everything." The sheriff gave his order to his men. There was a cruel whistle of wind and a scream as they aimed their weapons at the defenseless Griffons. Several shots rang out, and one by one, as if mowed down, they fell lifeless, leaving only silence behind. Ethan watched with chilling horror, feeling the world crumble around him. He had lost everything. All his hopes, dreams, his entire life. Everything shattered in an instant. "Now it's your turn," the sheriff growled, his footsteps drawing closer to Ethan like death itself approaching. "You will suffer, old man. You will suffer as they did." A pronouncement echoing in the air declared, "You will pay for all your sins." But in that very instant, when Sarah seemed doomed, something incredible happened. Exploiting the bandits' confusion, she broke free from their grasp like a wildcat. In a flash, with desperate resolve blazing in her eyes, Sarah snatched up a knife that lay nearby. The sheriff hadn't expected such a turn of events, such a brazen act. He recoiled, his face contorted with astonishment and fear, and in that moment, Sarah, without wasting a single second, plunged the knife straight into his chest. The sheriff, felled by the sudden attack, collapsed to the ground, killed instantly. A moment passed, and then silence. A crushing, oppressive silence hung in the air, freezing the bandits, unsure of what to do next. They froze like statues, stunned by what had occurred. Sarah stood over the sheriff's body, her face, once beautiful, now smeared with blood. His, and possibly her own. A storm raged in her eyes. Despair, triumph, horror, all swirling together into a chilling spectacle. She looked at Ethan, and fear was absent from the depths of her eyes, replaced by steely resolve. "You are free, Ethan," she said, her voice as solid as stone. "You are free now." The remaining bandits, realizing their strength was depleted, fled, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan and Sarah stood alone on the battlefield, a field strewn with bodies. Lifeless forms of defeated enemies lay scattered around them, a grim reminder of the fierce battle that had just ended. They were both wounded, exhausted, but alive. Blood stained their clothes, a stark testament to the suffering they had endured. Ethan looked at Sarah, and immense gratitude shone in his eyes. He realized Sarah was his salvation, his hope, his ray of light in the overwhelming darkness. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked softly, her voice trembling with fatigue and tension. Ethan stared at the lifeless bodies of the Griffons. A chilling horror gripped him from within. He could no longer remain here, in a place where, in a matter of only a few hours, his happiness had been brutally crushed. He had to leave, to run, to save himself. "We'll leave," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking with unshed tears. "We'll leave this cursed place forever, leaving behind everything we held dear. We'll begin a new, clean life." After brief but agonizing preparations, they buried the fallen Griffons, whispering a few words of thanks for their loyalty and farewells over the graves. The burial took about 2 hours. Then they gathered their few belongings and left the Red Wind Canyon Ranch. The sun was already sinking towards the horizon, painting the sky in crimson hues. Holding hands, Ethan and Sarah slowly walked on foot towards the sunset, towards the unknown. Silence hung between them like a heavy veil, but in that silence, a silent promise was felt that together they would overcome everything. They faced a long journey, a path strewn with countless hardships, but now, at this very moment, they were together, hand in hand. Fate had brought them together in this cruel, dangerous world. They had found salvation in each other, discovering hope like a beacon in the darkness. With unwavering faith in their hearts, they pressed forward towards a new life, unaware of what tomorrow would bring. Yet they were ready to accept all the challenges that destiny held for them, ready to fight for their happiness, to love, and to live life to the fullest. For they were together, and in that lay their greatest strength. After many days of wandering, they finally reached a small town nestled amongst the hills. The town seemed quiet and deserted, as if abandoned by everyone. But at the same time, it possessed an atmosphere of peace and tranquility. The setting sun, beginning its descent, painted the tiled roofs of the houses in warm, golden hues, creating a sense of serenity, so necessary after all they had endured. Ethan and Sarah had bought a modest little house on the very edge of town, starting a new chapter in their lives. Ethan found work on a farm, and Sarah happily managed the household, creating a cozy nest. They were happy. Their hearts were filled with love. They supported each other in every endeavor. They found the long-awaited peace they craved. One evening, as they sat on the porch holding hands and admiring the sunset, an elderly man approached them slowly. His clothes were quite worn, and his face was etched with deep wrinkles, like a map of a well-traveled road. His appearance seemed to reflect the same weariness and loneliness that Ethan had seen in himself. "I know who you are," the old man said, staring intently at Ethan. "I know your story." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. The old man, with his penetrating gaze, fixed him with his eyes. He understood that the old man knew his secret, his dark secret that he had carefully hidden for many years. "I, too, lived in solitude," the old man said softly, his voice seeming to hold echoes of years gone by. "I made many mistakes, but I found forgiveness, and you will find it too." The old man, with a wrinkled hand, offered Ethan an old, yellowed photograph. Ethan took it, his fingers trembling. The photograph showed himself, Sarah, and their team, the Griffons. It was the very photograph Ethan had lost many years ago, a picture that held memories of youth, friendship, and betrayal. He gently touched the image, as if hoping to retrieve the lost past. Ethan picked up the photograph, clutching it in trembling fingers. His gaze drifted to Sarah's face, and he saw in her eyes not only the familiar tenderness, but also understanding and support. It was as though she knew all his secrets, all his fears. At that moment, he realized the old man had been right. He found forgiveness, not just for himself, but for those connected to him. They lived a long and happy life. They raised children, then grandchildren, surrounded by care and love. Never forgetting the past, they learned to live in the present, cherishing every moment. Ethan passed away in his bed, surrounded by his loving family. Sarah, his devoted companion, held his hand until the very end, until his heart ceased to beat. After Ethan's death, Sarah, feeling a profound loneliness, returned to her native lands, to the mysterious Red Wind Canyon, where their story had once begun. She buried him there, close to the enigmatic Griffons. In this harsh place, where the wind seemed to sing its eternal mournful song, Sarah often returned in her thoughts to her life with Ethan. She clearly remembered their tender love, their deep sorrows, and their desperate struggle. She knew that their story, like those majestic cliffs, would live forever. Sometimes, when the wind howled particularly fiercely, as if hundreds of invisible voices merged into a single chorus, Sarah heard the ominous roar of the Griffons. A slight smile appeared on her lips because she knew Ethan was always near, watching over her. She sat on the very edge of the gorge, her eyes wide open, watching the sunset. The sun, a huge crimson ball, rolled behind the jagged edges of the canyon, casting long, bizarre shadows like the claws of unknown creatures. She knew that her story, a story of immense love and heroic survival, would live forever, just like this wild, beautiful land which held the memory of many thousands of years. Suddenly, on the horizon, on the road stretching for many kilometers, she saw the silhouette of a person slowly approaching her. He was alone, his face hidden by a pulled-down hat. His unhurried but confident steps echoed in the silence. His feet, accustomed to the stony ground, brought him closer relentlessly. In his hands, he carried something wrapped in rough, in some places worn, fabric. A strange excitement seized Sarah, making her heart beat anxiously. She didn't know who he was, this stranger, but she felt without a doubt he would bring news. News which she had waited for so long. He drew closer, and Sarah could finally make out his face. It was a young, handsome face framed by dark hair. His eyes, as deep as a pool, seemed familiar, painfully reminiscent of Ethan's eyes, her departed beloved. An aura of strength emanated from him, but also an unbearable, all-consuming sorrow. The man stopped directly in front of her, raised his hand, and removed his hat. In his hands, he clutched a tightly bound bundle. "My name is Tom," he announced, his voice seeming to tremble almost imperceptibly. "I am Ethan's son." Sarah couldn't hold back the tears, hot, burning against her cheeks. Tom carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside, resting on the delicate fabric, lay a small egg, no bigger than a dove's. "They've returned," Tom whispered softly. "They remember." Sarah slowly, as if afraid of causing harm, took the egg in her hands. Warmth spread through her skin, and with it hope, timid yet so long awaited. She felt her heart, which seemed to still for a moment, then beat again, in unison with an unknown force hidden within. She gazed at the sunset as the sun painted strange patterns across the sky with crimson and gold strokes. The wind, as always, sang its harsh song, piercing everything around. But now, in this melody, another note appeared. A timid note of hope. A tremulous note of faith. Life continued its course even in the harshest conditions, sparing no one. And love, like a mythical griffin, can rise again from the ashes, renewed and strengthened.